Good morning, good evening, good morning. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is David Okon. Thank you everybody for helping me to subscribe. Thank you for subscribing. All my subscribers, thank you so much for your support. Thank you also for sharing and for making comments. Thank you so much. And we've been doing well. We've been talking about the cost of living. The cost of living has been a major problem. And if you look at human life, if you look at your life, if you look at the life of your neighbors, you're living in Europe, America, you're living in Africa, wherever you are living, life is wonderful. It's full of challenges. You know, people like living together. As humans, we are social beings. We live together, and we like helping one another. When there is a crisis, and also our government have also said to us that they can help whenever we are in trouble, whenever there's a situation. Our government said they will help us, and they do help us all the time, especially if you live in the developed countries, but also if you live in the developing countries like Africa, or if you live in the Middle East, you know, in Asia, in any part of the world. There is a divide between the rich and the poor nations. Poor countries are the ones who are referred to as the developed world. But also, if you are poor, like Africa, you are referred to as developing country. And during the cost of living crisis, which is essentially an income problem, usually people in the developing countries suffer more than people in the developed countries. And within these regions, different regions of the world, poor people, people who work for a living, people who need to work as of necessity in, say, Britain or Europe or America or any of the developed countries, or even maybe in Africa as well. There is something called the minimum wage, which is a form of government intervention in wages or salaries. If you work for a living, the minimum the law would say to pay your salary is actually set in place to support small and medium businesses and also big businesses. But what I would say about businesses is that the government during this time like we have now, the best thing for the government to do is actually to help small and medium businesses to support employment. Because right now with the crisis, which I said previously, in the other videos I say again, that the cost of living is a crisis. And it is a major problem because it is a crisis. Otherwise, the cost of living has always been there. If you pay for something, you pay for goods and services, products, that is the cost of living. Sometimes the cost of living can be, the definition can be stretched, depends what you want to do. Sometimes, you know, if you live your life and, you know, you're not happy you're in a relationship, your relationship breaks down, and it costs you happiness. Life always costs something. Sometimes it costs your life. People die in the process of work. People fight also. They can die fighting at home, on the streets, or actually more structured warfare, like involving in the military. People die. Those are also costs of life. But cost of living is a specific situation where when you cannot afford to buy the basics like food, energy, you cannot afford healthcare, you cannot afford housing, and sometimes you lose your job. And if you're sick, you can't work. And in the modern economy, you need to have employment or self-employment. If you're a small and medium business, or you are actually somebody who works for a living. And the concept of working for a living is, it is of necessity that you go to work. And when these processes are disrupted, and then people get into trouble like we have now in the current crisis of cost of living, the factors we all are familiar with as causes is the war in Ukraine, but also there are other causes such as COVID-19, Brexit, which began in Britain, and when the global financial crash which happened in America, and when global affecting the rest of the world. Because we live in a globalized world, one event happening in one country potentially affects the rest of the globe. So because of something called globalization, I've discussed this in previous videos. If you watch them, and every time I record a new video, I try to give a synopsis, an overview of the issues. And at the heart of this conversation, the purpose, actually part of the value of this exercise, is that the primary solution to any problem is to understand the problem. We live in a world of knowledge. Our economy is knowledge-based. Our society is actually driven by knowledge. So it is really necessary for everyone, it doesn't matter who you are, whether you went to school or didn't go to school, to be an expert on the cost of living. Every time, if you're sick, if you are suffering from sickle cell, maybe pneumonia, or any of the diseases, cancer, you need to be an expert on cancer, on diabetes. And if you begin to do a research on diseases, you'll be shocked the number of diseases now. There's so many sicknesses, and we need proper health care in every country to deal with, the increase in health conditions. Stress is a form of a killing disease. It's lethal. And stress and brought about by things like depression and anxiety and generally mental illness. It's a major problem, especially in the developed world, but also in the developing world, especially children and women and mothers and things like that. The young people, a lot of people are now committing suicide, and for many reasons, because we live in a complex world where there's a lot of violence. And I've been saying this, that there are two sectors to progress, development and culture. We have done well in terms of progress, in terms of development, technology, wealth creation, operating capitalism and the market economic system. These are actually systems useful to create wealth around the world for the rich, super rich, but also people who are not necessarily rich, who work for a living. And it is really challenging for me personally to describe individuals or groups as poor. Because sometimes people, especially in a developed world like ours, but also in developing world countries like in Africa, because there is a lot of money in Africa now under capitalism, because African governments are now practicing the capitalism, which is fully blown aspects of capitalism, which is a highly marketized method of doing businesses, small, medium businesses, self-employed, or employee, people who work for a living. All these are now changing such that the more and more businesses are now private. So what we have now left is actually the closing down of the public sector, which is also the public business, expressed by public business. Things we used to rely on for healthcare, for public transport, public housing, for people who are actually poor, people who work for a living, who cannot afford to buy a house outright. And this is actually one thing I will be talking about it consistently, because it is at the root of every inequality. In the modern world, poverty is not supposed to exist in the modern society, in the developed world, and also in the developing country. This is a message which is at the heart of this exercise, for people to understand that it is not inevitable that people should be in poverty. People in poverty because of negligence. So you could also argue that it was by design that people are poor in the sixth richest country in the world, like Britain, the first richest country, the richest country in the world, like the United States of America, in China, being the second richest in the world, in all the European countries, the industrialized countries, but also in Africa, as some of the wealthiest individuals are in Africa. When you talk of development, technology, artificial intelligence, nanotechnologies, robotics, and 3D printers, all these things should now provide the start of economic independence for individuals and for groups. So in that context, privatization is really appropriate as a concept and also as a practice of economic relationship. The problem with capitalism and marketization of society is actually is incidental when people, there are people, the majority of the population in the developed and also developing countries are actually working for a living, and when also there's a crisis, people who are actually ordinary people who are multi-billionaires, who are not multi-billionaires, these kind of people are there because of negligence. We live with a lot of wealth, and people do not necessarily be wealthy in a modern society. What we need now is actually people not to get out of poverty. It is very shameful, should be shameful to everybody to talk about poverty in a big country like Britain, in America, European countries. These places, nobody should be in poverty at all. And it is rightly so that a lot of people living in these big developed nations do not necessarily want to associate themselves with poverty. This is shameful. People are so ashamed, and people feel insulted in a country like Britain. And I talk about Britain mainly because Britain is going to be the most powerful economy in the world in the near future, and places like the city of London is going to take over or running the global economy. It's going to be more powerful than New York and all these other financial institutions of the world. These are actually the changes now, the adjustment now being done on the economy. So the city of London, for example, is one of the most powerful cities on earth, and it is in the UK. And so, if you start telling people, Britain is a poor country, it's embarrassing. And it makes you look bad, but otherwise, if they were not poor people in the UK, we wouldn't be talking about the cost of living. And until people begin to realize that you can borrow your way to feeling good, feeling maybe affluent, but in the real world, if you borrow money to buy a house, a 4 or 5 bedroom house, you borrow money to buy such a house, which may actually cost up to £800,000 or dollars, or even $1 million. When your earning per annum is only maybe 80,000 per annum, where do you get the money from? You have to borrow the money. You think you're rich because you live in 1 million or even 1.5 million. Because if you get something like 400,000 pounds per annum, if you only get 500,000, you can actually easily get 2 million pounds to borrow to buy really big. You live like a millionaire, but you are not, because you borrowed the money. You're actually in debt, and if you fail to pay your debt, you're going to be penniless. You go from somebody who earns hundreds of thousands of pounds. You're living in a £1 million house because you borrowed the money. You have nothing. Because if there is a crisis like the cost of living and you lose your job, you're going to lose your home within 6 months. The government may help you with interest rates, on benefits, but if you have savings, they won't pay you. If you have in the UK, I'm now specifically talking about the United Kingdom. You talk about the UK, it will be similar with other countries in Europe. You talk about property, for example, and you lose your job and you are on a mortgage, you're borrowing money to buy your property. The government is not going to help you with your mortgage. They will only pay the interest rate on the mortgage. I don't know for how long. I think it's a temporary measure. You have to find your way back to work, otherwise you have to sell your property. You become homeless, then probably, hopefully, you'll get public housing. When you come to public housing, you can wait for 20 years in a temporary accommodation, overcrowded with children, overcrowded in a house which is actually a temporary accommodation. You can live there for 20 years. The council will argue in the UK, the council will argue that you are not homeless, so they are not going to give you property. In short, before getting into these details, because I've been talking generally. If I finish talking generally, then I'll start talking maybe specifically about the issue of housing in the UK. Because I have to be really specific. I can do a research and talk about housing, condition of housing in the UK in this program. That's why I'm talking generally, so that people build a picture, so that wherever you are in the world on this program, you have a rough idea why, without the details. You have to determine why, the fundamentals of what causes the cost of living. But that's why the problem, for example, like I'm trying to say now, of housing. You lose your job, you lose your home. You lose your home, you don't have money. You have to, in the UK, if you're in the UK, you lose your job, you go to the government to get benefit. And the government, instead of, even in the UK, instead of the government to phone your employer, your former employer, if you lose your job with your employer, your record is with the tax office. The DWP, because of bureaucracy, which is actually self-delivery, the DWP is not going to give you benefit. You have to prove that you lost the job. Now, if you ask yourself, why should your advisor, if they want evidence, because you have your P45, you have a letter to say that you have been laid off, or maybe you have been dismissed from work because of some disciplinary issue. Whether you are unfairly dismissed or fairly dismissed is not for the DWP to ask. DWP only should establish that you are out of work and you need help, temporary help. That's all they need to do, but that is not what is happening with the DWP, because they have changed the way the benefit system works. The reason they changed the system because they don't want to give benefit to people because for political and ideological reasons in the UK. That is in America, in Europe, and other parts of the world. There is a global political agenda to shut down the public sector. And this is not affecting every sector of the economy. That's why I keep talking about a focus on the government. Because if I begin to talk about the UK alone, then I have to really try to send people to leave a comment below to try and address the issue maybe in the rest of Europe. But I try to do a presentation which is actually it cover a perspective which is global, and what the element of cost of living, the way at policy level, when I look at policy and politics of the cost of living, it helps people to look broadly in the UK, in America, in the globe, in Africa. But if I begin to talk about the UK, then I will be concentrating on the UK. That's something I will do in the future. And if you want to know something specific about the UK, housing and air available, leave a comment below. And I will specifically look for information for you and where to get help, because I live in the UK. And I've already said for people who, if you want help from the government, because there are help, there's youth looking for help from the government. And if you need that kind of help, the first place to go is actually the government website in your country. My suspicion is that the kind of help given here in Britain is similar to what is given in the European countries and in America. In most developed countries, the Middle East probably also. But it may be slightly or significantly different. If you look at Africa, you find that the kind of help given in Africa is different. And I'll also try to explain the situation in Africa. Because if people who are listening to me, if you are in Africa, any of the countries, go to your local leaders. And if you feel you cannot access a member of parliament, go to your local leader and show them this video and ask them to go to the government website, because when I send somebody in Africa to visit the government website, imagine a man or woman in the village in Africa. They may not even have internet connection. They may not even have electricity. They may not even have the internet, access to the internet, not even mobile phone. They may be in a situation where they cannot even afford to buy clothing, food, even water, even medicine. They can die of malaria. People who are poor in Africa are very, very poor at the moment. And if the world wanted peace for Africa, I think the time is now, with the cost of living should be seen as an opportunity. At least people who are actually in government, in the West, in the Middle East, and in Africa, especially the leaders in Africa, should now begin to unite to try and focus efforts to develop rural Africa, because the poverty there is worse than the poverty in Europe and America. And the people of this country do not understand when people talk of poverty in Africa. They do not understand, because the way I understand poverty is different, because I live in Africa and I live here in Africa. And if I try to speak to people who never went to Africa, or people who came into the UK, into Europe when they were still young, they will not understand what we're talking about when we talk about poverty. I am able to identify people in the UK who are living in poverty, because I work on social policy. I work as an advisor, legal advisor on social policy. So I talk to so many people who are struggling with an issue of income. Actually give legal advice on the cost of living. That's why when I identify poverty like somebody who knows what they're talking about, because I deal with the issue of poverty. There's something called income maximization and dealing with the issue of debt advice. And you need to be an expert on income issues and social policy if you live in Britain, because this is a very advanced country. You can go to the library. You can actually gain access to the internet and in the library. If you have a mobile phone, you can actually access the internet. Every household, more or less, have access to the internet. But also, if you're living in the UK, the local authority are helping with the cost of electricity, not electricity, internet. You can actually funding you can get from the local authority to help with internet funding, and all sorts of help actually are available. My only disagreement with the system of benefit is that it's extremely complicated, and people are confused about benefit. So sometimes you speak to people trying to understand what they need. People don't ask for help because they think they have to pay it back. When you talk about grants, some people don't understand what a grant is. They think grant is a loan, and loan is a grant, it's the same thing. And I'm not talking about people who are ordinary. We're talking about professionals. So, there are some professionals who do not know what a grant is. And but I know, because I'm trained to give advice on income and things like that. So, and there are people who know, even if they are not trained, they know grant is something you get and you don't pay back. Loan is something you get and you have to pay it back, sometimes with or without interest. But when you get loan from the social fund in the UK, generally the UK, you don't pay, you pay it back but without interest. And sometimes there are certain things, advances you can pay maybe on your benefit. You pay it back without interest. If you borrow student finance, I think student finance, you borrow loan and you pay with some interest, but you are not actually required to pay it back until you get a job. And I think if you get £21,000 per annum, then you don't have to pay it back. These are some of the small little details, just a taster of what happens in the UK as of specifics. Something I'll be talking about going forward. But now I need to talk broadly so that we get a broader perspective. And if you want to know things in more detail, do a self-study. Go and stay in the library at least once or twice a week. Read everything you need to read. Access local authority website and learn what is available in terms of help, in terms of specific type of benefit, like household support fund. These things are there, but sometimes people actually don't bother to access this benefit, and I don't blame them, or I don't actually condone them, because I encourage them normally to try and get this help. But right now, I want to talk broadly. Then in the future, I start talking. That's the plan. I start thinking about this help specifically. But at the same time, if anybody is infected, or if somebody you know is infected in any country you live in, let them go online. If they cannot access online facilities, especially in Africa, it will almost be impossible to get help, even if help is there. But my feeling is that there is no help in Africa at all. That's why I don't even know how to speak to the people in Africa, because the situation, if I start talking about Africa, is going to be even more complicated, because where will you start in Africa if you're trying to give help to people? How are you going to get help? Because, you know, people who are so, I mean, there is no system in Africa to deal with corruption, generally. And when it comes to welfare benefit in Africa, probably people who are responsible for distributing welfare are the ones who are going to be paying themselves with the money. That is a complex situation in Africa, which is probably, it doesn't exist anywhere else. It only exists in Africa because of lack of failure of civil infrastructure. If you want to know some of the longest serving dictators, they call themselves Democrats because they old election. But everybody knows that in Africa, most presidents who stay 10, 20, 30, 40 years, weak election. Even if nobody knows that, but everybody keeps quiet about that. Because you see, politics now is like business. People do not tell the truth. Even the people in the democratic world, like Europe, America, they know the truth, but they don't want to be involved because it creates problems. They just look the other way. What the Europeans want from Africa is actually to control natural resources. And if I'm correct, I think it is a blessing in disguise that dictators rule Africa, so that the developed countries, China, India, you know, Russia, Ukraine probably is also involved, but mainly, you know, America, Europe, these countries, it would be accurate for me if what I would say, it would be correct to suspect that, you know, dictatorship is created deliberately because it helps the developed world to steal resources from Africa, including land, including minerals. You know, that's why there's a lot of violence in Africa now. People are dying in Africa. But the war in Africa, the Middle East, the places like Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and in South America, these are actually, you know, violence hotspots. And places like Rwanda, Burundi, you know, Niger, Syria, Israel. Sometimes we forget Israel when we talk about the Middle East, because, you know, it's probably possible to say that almost all the problems in the Middle East between the Jews and Arabs, and why they fight is a cultural issue mainly. Is actually disguised as political, but it is a cultural issue. People, it's a human problem. I've said this before, I say it again, because you need to know two things is causing the crisis. The cost of living is a symptom of society. The symptom is evidence that culturally we have failed, and if we were culturally healthy, we wouldn't be having crisis like the cost of living anywhere in the world. It's cultural failure, and it's a form of violence. It's a very dangerous, it's a lethal kind of weapon which is actually operating across the globe. And this lethality associated with culture and political culture in particular is the fact that capitalism is operating without the support of the public sector. The public sector within Europe and the Western world, as well as part of Asia, there is privatization where the public sector is closed down. And this closing down of the public sector, it has incapacitated governments in America and in Europe and in the rest of the world. It incapacitated these countries such that these countries cannot provide public services, in the sense that the government has decided to shut down public economy. What is left now is private businesses attempting to provide public service. That's why there's poverty in the UK, poverty in Europe and America. In every rich country where there should have been no poverty, there is poverty. That is what triggers the cost of living prices because of shutting down the public sector. This point must be remembered. And if you are in a developed world, go to your MP and tell them, we know why we are suffering the cost of living, because your government, like in the UK here, the Conservative government is responsible for closing down the public sector. New Labour under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, these politicians and political parties and governments are responsible for creating poverty in the UK. And this is implicated across Europe and across America for one simple reason: promotion of capitalism, which is actually an extreme version of a private marketized economy. And this is something I'm going to be repeating over and over and over until I detect in the comment section that people are actually following what I'm saying, because I cannot say a lot more unless people understand the concept. Unless my aim is to create an awareness so that people are actually alerted to the situation that any problem you have, you are the one to solve it, because we used to depend on the government. Not anymore. Government have said to us, we are not helping you anymore. You help yourself. And we need to listen to what the government says, because it has shut down the public sector. What is left is for political reasons, for PR, public relations, to tell the British people that, oh, we are helping you, but all the help is going to private companies who put it in their pocket. Their pocket is actually the capital investment and infrastructure investment. There is something called revenue investment, which is what we get as people who need help. And this is lacking because all the money is pumped into capital, which is the wealth for the wealthy. Those who own energy companies, people who produce food, and hospital, healthcare. So private sector now, the NHS has been, the National Health Service in the UK has been sold off. This is in the face of every politician promising that they're not going to shut down the health sector. And you think the Labour Party, who used to defend the public sector, is still doing the same? No. The Labour Party we see now is no longer the Labour Party. Labour Party is dead. They started something called New Labour. That is actually, it's not new, nothing new about New Labour. It's just a corrupt Labour Party. When I say they are corrupt, I mean they are lost. They are lost because they used to protect public sector. Because the Labour Party, the real Labour Party, understand poverty. And they were the ones helping people who, the majority of the country, the 90% of the population, When I talk of 90%, it's a rough estimate. And believe it or not, when I say 90%, and it is a guesswork, do not despise it. Because if you check the actual statistics, and if you analyze it accurately, you are going to draw a conclusion which is even worse, producing a far, far worse outcome than what you see. Because, sometimes you come into a place and everything looks tidy, everything seems all right. There are chairs, there are beds, you have food in the fridge, you have cookers. You don't realize, you just, life seems to be good. The walls are painted, there are curtains, there's television, everything is in the house. You come to a place, you think there is money in it, but a lot of those things are actually borrowed. You get it on credit. And if you are clever and you buy durable product, then maybe after 10 years you finish paying it. And then, so the problem with shopping is that it's addictive. There's something addictive about getting, like, the more things you have in your house, if you're working, if you can get credit, you want to get from 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and these houses, a 1 bedroom flat in London probably cost £200,000. Average earning in the UK is actually about between 30 and 50,000 pounds. These are actually the middle class now. See, that's how low people get paid in the UK. Average pay in the UK, people who can cope get between 20 to 30,000 pounds after tax in the UK, working full time, Monday to Friday. But the rest of the people, people are so. For me personally, I feel people do not understand at all the situation they are in. A lot of people really, people really don't know the risks they are facing, especially with the cost of living. That's why I say the cost of living is an opportunity for people to wake up from the sleep. Because since I've been talking about this topic, I've discovered that what drives me is that, especially from point of view of my work with people on a daily basis, I discovered that people do not know many things, and there is a lot of information, and you can't blame them because people are so busy. You have to work morning to Friday, and trying to, and people are in debt, and I was just waiting to get out, and you can't get out. So some people are so shocked, and people are in stress, and stress is actually killing people. So I try every day for people to, because my channel is quite small, and until more people actually come into my channel, it's going to be difficult to try and figure out what people may be interested in. But that is no longer what I'm looking for. I'm just trying to play my part and do as much as possible, hoping people will begin to, even only one person really try to understand what I'm trying to talk about, and begin to. A lot of people are actually talking to me that this kind of thing I'm talking about makes sense. But sometimes it's so frustrating because I seem to be repeating the same point. But until we get some basics, because you see, the idea is that if we are going to solve problems, we have to change fundamentally. We have to change the way we think, and that's what I'm actually. What I'm trying to do. People actually to use their resources to solve problems. It's something called empowerment. And if you give information to people and you encourage them, you support them to do things themselves, like the government has said already that you need to help yourself now, and the government can't help people all the time. I mean, I wish the British people where I live, I wish the British people would listen to me or to somebody else, that the government is no longer helping people. But this is what I've been saying over and over. I will be saying the same thing over and over. The government is not helping you. Wake up and start looking after yourself, and stop talking about suicide. You don't deserve to die, not even poverty. If you want to die, fine. If you think it's your solution, because you think where did you come from? We don't know that. Why do you even think people know how to commit suicide, but that's the easy bit. And it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're Prime Minister, whether you're King Charles, you will never ever persuade me that suicide is a good thing. To me, the solution to suicide is actually changing the way we think. That's why I've been talking a lot about cultural change. I believe very strongly that the best medicine is actually our mindset. And our mindset is the product of education. I've been saying this thing over and over and over. Because if you start thinking positively, every problem becomes as an opportunity. And I'm so dedicated to put this idea to the test. I mean, if you watch my video, join me in this exercise, and they actually produce an argument. Instead of relying, I mean, there is a possibility where we may also begin to rely on our mindset to produce healing. Because there's something called complementary medicine. And people, if you see things like placebo effect or products or ideas or thinking, and if you believe something is medicine, if you're given just a bottle of water like that, you're just giving a bottle of water and somebody tells you it's medicine, there are actually tests, research being done that people are actually being healed. Even if they were not given medicine, they will get better, and sometimes they get ill. This is actually a hidden aspect of medicine research. Actually, research into medical technology. I know very little about it, but the information should be there because I saw it somewhere. I don't have accurate information about it, but these are some of the things we should start thinking about. If you think something, you become what you think. That much everybody knows now. Do they? Because the thing that if we begin to think that we can rely on ourselves, suicide is not an option. That means you have to take a stance to use a crisis like the cost of living, where people resort to drinking, people resort to taking drugs or doing all sorts of things, committing crime or even becoming violent, whatever it is, because inevitably something we are not seeing probably very well. In the next 5 to 10 years, most people will begin to lose their jobs. In the sense that the things which create jobs in this country or in other countries is actually the public sector. The government intervenes specifically with policies to support employment. Right now, potentially in the UK, and I believe in the Europe and America, there are a lot of demand for services, especially social services. So much so that if the government decides to invest in services, almost everybody in the countries will be employed, giving advice, giving support, giving care. In the hospital, there are enough doctors. A country like the UK is able to eradicate lack of clinicians within 5 years, training them, and it has the capacity to be one of the best training schools for health workers, for schools, teachers and support workers, administrators in schools, because we need more schools and more education. We need more hospitals and more healthcare facilities. People are now being sent home because there are no beds in the hospital, and the government is not telling the truth at all. That these are actually what people want. People do not want that. People want to be in the hospital, and people want medical doctors who can diagnose their problem and solve it. People do not want kind of health workers where you go to the hospital and a doctor is sitting there talking to you as if you're a doctor, and you don't know what's wrong with you. Because if you take your car to a garage and a mechanic asks you what's wrong with the car, you can say, I can't start the car. Say, why not? Why can't you start the car? I don't know. That's why I brought it to you. So now this is kind of like the behavior of medical doctors. But that is a separate problem. That is at least not as bad as I'm trying to portray. The worst thing is that you're trying to get to the doctor. You can't. You go to the hospital, instead of speaking to your doctor, you speak to a voice machine. You phone the hospital. You speak to a voice message. You can potentially wait for an hour to speak to not the doctor, to speak to a receptionist. Receptionists are actually non-clinical people. They are administrators. Why do you take a demonstrator to the hospital? They don't know anything to do with medicine. Why do you waste the patient? Some patients are so sick. You phone an ambulance if you're very, very sick. Ambulance will refuse to come. They will ask you to ambulance is going to ask you to call for a taxi. Some of them are so rude. They will also say they are not ambulance. That's how rude they are, because that's how they are trained. The culture is now reflecting the attitude of the government. They don't speak. They are no longer nice to patients. They are trained that patients want to abuse the service. That's the attitude of public service workers, who are more and more now attached to the private companies, whose aim is now to make money, to save money. There is something like efficiency saving. That is wrong. Wrong number. When the government talk about saving, what is talking about is that they are going to support public sector. That's the only thing they talk about. And saving is totally unrelated to public sector service. And there is an acceptance within the political culture today that it is the right thing for the public sector, public services to be provided by private companies. That is wrong, because that doesn't work, and it doesn't work. It did not work during COVID-19. There was a crisis. So many people died not of COVID, but for failure of the health sector, which could not support people who have medical help other than COVID-19. COVID-19 didn't kill many people. because it was not violent, in the sense that it was not a lethal, it was not a killer. COVID-19 was not a killer. It spread quickly and it makes people very sick. People died of underlying health conditions because hospitals could not cope. And this is what the government cannot tell you because of political reasons. And I say the government should now change. Government should change. If there are good people running the country, they should change. They should change now and start behaving like humans. Because if you look at some individuals now within the government, within the public service provision sector, most of them, like I said, it's private companies providing public services. They behave like demons. Politicians, some politicians now, especially politicians within the Conservative Party, behave like as if they are aliens. Aliens who are demon possessed because they are heartless. Rich Sunak recently was talking about compassionate conservatives. A lot of conservative party politicians talk a lot about compassion. You don't tell us about compassion. We want to see compassion reflected in your policy. The public political attitude to public sector and public service reveal that these people have no passion at all. They have not compassion. They are passionate to destroy public sector. But you see, if that is your passion, then you don't have compassion for people. Maybe you have compassion for ghosts or aliens or some other species, not humans. Because it's a form of cruelty to shut down the public sector, which is what politicians are doing now, especially the Conservative Party and New Labour and the Conservative and Labour Democrats. Any politician who is on the right wing of political belief, people who believe that businesses and the private sector is the only good thing in life, this type of individuals are actually, they are not entirely human, they are modified humans. They are part animals. Even animals are actually better than them. They are actually aliens. Aliens who are actually vicious. They behave like these creatures you see in all stories. They are savages. And that's what they do. And that is what's happening. And this is just the beginning. Because without the public sector, closing down the public sector is the same as killing close to 90% of the global population, and it is actually growing global. It's not just in the developed world, it's now visible in the developed world. But if you consider Africa, that schools now are being supported by parents who are totally poor. And you talk about poverty in Africa, it's a totally different ball of game. You see, it's different from what we see in the UK. Infrastructurally, there is poverty. If you want to set up the health service, you need to start building even the roads for ambulance. You have to buy ambulance. You have to set up ambulance infrastructure and capital investment. Although it is taking place, it's just taking place for people who are rich with money and with corruption. Corruption is an industry in Africa, and it is deliberate to destroy the public sector and to kill people actually. Whether you know it or not, if you are responsible for such a policy, you are actually killing people. People are going to die. As simple as that. And so, I think if you are an alien, resign. If Rishi Sunak, if you are not a human being, resign. Do yourself a favor. Get out of politics altogether, because you're going to start killing people. Your behavior is going to kill people. It's not only going to kill the poor. If you think, because if you're a Rishi Sunak, you're a multi-millionaire, you're worth in hundreds of millions of pounds. You think you're going to survive? No, this is a humanitarian situation. You allow poor people to die 90% of the population, even more. Because these are actually people who are lower and middle classes who work for a living, will start dying because of the closing down of the public sector. Capitalism cannot operate without the public sector. It cannot. But the way it is going now, if we are to have public sector right now, we have to restore it. We have to rebuild it. It is going to cost a lot of money. I don't think it is going to happen. That's why I'm very keen. I don't think the government is going to rebuild the public sector. It's gone. Totally gone. Whatever is left is a residue. It's something people can cope with for now, but prepare for the worst. Prepare for the worst. In that, preparation means learn how to survive. Learn how to be fit. If you are not fit, you are not going to survive, because the world is turning into a jungle. The law is also changing. You see, in Africa, there is no duty of care anymore from the government in Africa. Africa is a symptom, it's a sign of the global society of the future. Technology may get people out of poverty, potentially. Should have been a sign of hope. But because of cultural and political violence, we, human beings, especially the ones in power, poor people are going to die first. Rich people will die last. But humanity is going to go extinct if we don't stop fighting. We need to figure out how to live peacefully right now. If you are a politician, if you are a leader, put it in your head. If you cannot really spell it out how we are going to live without wars, because as long as it's complete lunatic to think you can fight yourself out of violence, you can fight yourself out of wars. You have to teach people, if you're a politician, you have to teach society how to live peacefully. So we need to think peace. Right now, if you look at our movies, you will even, sometimes I avoid watching movies these days because of the violence. It's teaching us. People on the street will start killing each other. In public places, like in bars, in nightclubs, on the streets, because of our culture, media culture, in television, in YouTube, the level of violence, sexual violence, verbal violence, swearing. Why swearing? People swear. People are always fighting now, more and more. We are going from, we talk about civil, but people are only civil because they lie. Even, I think most politicians actually use the S word, the swear word, the F word, rather. They swear behind the scene. I think, unfortunately, I'm not a civil servant. I don't work with ministers. And prime ministers probably swear behind the scene. In their offices, they use the F word. That is violence. It's violent language. Language of violence. The S word. People swear. That is just language. You see, language violence. And children are swearing. Young people are so disrespectful. They don't respect adults. Men do not respect men. Women do not respect each other. People do not respect one another at all these days. They pretend. You see, there is something called racism. If you're a black person in a white country, you will understand it. You try to apply for a job, you don't get it for no reason, and your bosses are white. And don't get me wrong, black people don't like black people because of the culture of prejudice. black people avoid black people because you see, black people is a bad story. What they call it, bad news. If you're black, you're bad news, and especially if you're born in Africa, no one wants you. You have to really count your luck, and if you are to get work and keep it, you have to work 10 or 20 times harder than a white person. And I would even like to think the way white people are treated in Africa, the white people in Africa are actually treated more favorably than black people, because it is Africans think they don't deserve anything. Because it's like, if you go to Africa where there are black people, because if you live in Europe, like I live in Europe, you see, there are places in the UK where I live. If you go to countryside, children will stop on the street to look at you. They have never seen, there are places they haven't seen black people. They stop on the street. And like you feel as if you're a tourist. Your children literally look, they're so fascinated looking at black people because they have never seen them. And they have never seen, maybe have heard of them. Right now it's happening. I went to Derbyshire as a group. We went as a group to Derbyshire for a wedding. We went to get some food from the supermarket and things like that. We packed our cars. We bumped on a group of people who was actually farmers. And children stopped to look at us. We were so, I was excited to see that, because to see people, children are innocent. But the thing to cause racism is fear. And fear, if you're bankrupt. Actually, we are so immature, we are so ignorant. We think black people are going to attack us. Or even I am afraid of black people in the UK. See, if I'm walking at night, I'm more likely to be afraid of a black person than of a white person. This is the truth. If I used to work in a supermarket. I work in the security sector. We were more alert if a black person comes into the shop, or we have to deal with it in some way. Because I don't know. So black people are probably more violent than white people, but that is a false perspective, because I think we are the same. Because that we have been conditioned mentally to think everybody fear a black person. Fear, actually. Even I fear black people more than fear the white person. But to come back to the point I'm talking about, if we fear a fellow human, we are going to develop hatred, and hatred actually is going to make us discriminate. When I go to a black person to get a job, to be recruited, a black person is more likely probably to hire a white person than me, because they are most likely to trust white people than me, especially in a white country. But even in Africa, white people are trusted. If you go to the hospital and get a white doctor, a medical doctor, or a white lecturer in Africa, you're more comfortable because you think they know what they're doing, and you are most likely to be right, because you see, in terms of communities, black community is quite backward, because everywhere black people are, they are discriminated against. Even its continent and countries in Africa. Africa is a community of countries are more disadvantaged, they are more discriminated against in terms of global funding, accessing wealth, security, and things like that. And this oppression is actually based on race mainly. But now more and more, discrimination based on class is overtaking racism. It's time to talk about racism. Racism is not just in a white country, but in a black country. And the most oppressed group of people in the world are actually blacks in Africa. Africa today suffer more because of racism. But now, because we are valuing money and wealth more than people, we are crossing from racism to classism. Class, in other words. People are being discriminated on the basis of class more than race. Race is still there, especially in a white country. But if you're born in Britain, and probably you're born in England, you're born in London, you grew up in a posh area of London, England, for example, your accent is different from when you are from maybe Liverpool or the northern part of England, and you speak like probably the Queen or the royal family more. Even if you are black, you are accepted more. More than if you're born in Scotland or Northern Ireland or in the east end of area where you have certain. When you are born in this country, you have certain strong accent speaking like the east enders will do, like people from some parts of London, but mainly from Northern England, so Liverpool, Manchester, Scotland, Wales. They have certain type of accent, and this, identifies you as belonging to a certain class of people. If you speak like people from the street, even if you're born in the UK, you speak as if somebody who didn't even go to school. If you went to school, you probably didn't go to a posh school like Cambridge and Oxford, because your accent. How about if you are born in Africa, like myself, you're speaking with a strong African accent? In the UK, you are identified very readily as being foreign. You are discriminated more than somebody born in the UK or somebody who came here as a younger person. They integrate more and more. But also in Africa now, the younger generation, their English is changing. And also if you went to a certain school, believe it or not, when Africa got independent, there were Americans, British, and the European teaching English in Africa. So the people who were born in the 50s and the 60s, who went to school in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 40s, the 60s, spoke more like the British. Their English was very polished, because the English people were the ones who introduced formal education in Africa. And then when we got our independence, the standard of English as a means of communication actually declined. We began to speak the type of English which is actually African. Is like we began to speak like Jamaican, but Jamaicans are also supported by the American kind of speaking, but they developed their distinctive English. Africa now has its own English, which is totally different from the English spoken in Europe. Because the Europeans, even though they are not English people, even if they are not British, they are more likely to adapt to speaking English more fluently than Africans, because culturally and also in terms of I think location, in terms of regions, Africans are distinctly different as opposed to when they were born in Britain or in France, in Germany, then or when they went into these countries, or in America, they begin to speak like American, which is a form of discrimination indicating class other than race. and you are speaking like a British person in Africa, you're considered to be posh. And posh is associated with wealth. And it's a system of value. I'm trying to talk about culture, cultural economy, which is actually a factor in why people are actually treated differently. But I'm talking about discrimination because I believe it should change. And the way it's going to change is education. That everybody is the same. We are all equal. It doesn't matter whether we have money in our pockets, whether we are millionaires or billionaires. And even if you talk in sign language, if you are a billionaire, you're treated like King Charles or Prince William or any member of the royal family, because you have money in your pocket. If you have maybe 10 million pounds or even 100 million or 200, 300 million, they will not see the skin of your color or the accent of your speaking. They will only see your money and your wealth. And this is money is good, but our value, what I'm trying to get to is that our culture should change, because we need to change the way we value life. Human value comes first. See, that's why the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, politicians are now talking, oh, we are going to be compassionate conservatives, we are going to be compassionate Labour, compassionate Liberal Democrats. They are now almost singing about the idea of compassion because it is lacking. If you are compassionate, bring back the public sector to provide public service. If you continue shutting down the public sector, which you have already shut, what is left is negligible. Then you are not a compassionate politician. Shut up. I know you are supposed to be free. You should enjoy your freedom of speech, but speak sense. So speaking nonsense, talk about compassionate conservatism or liberal or the Labour Party. Just don't talk nonsense. If you knew you were compassionate, you will look after people and look after people who cannot help themselves, the majority of the population of the world. You promote the public sector, provide healthcare, schools, public transport, employment. The employment has to be supported by the government, because the private sector cannot create jobs. They only create jobs if they need it. And it doesn't matter how rich they are, they don't really create jobs as a welfare program. But the government is supposed to treat employment as a welfare system, because the employment is the primary source of income. And so I was intending, because I've already spoken for an hour, was intending to speak more about the credit crunch which happened in 2007 and 2008. We started in America and created a lot of financial and economic problems, which also is responsible fundamentally for the current cost of living. So the purpose of this discussion was to discuss this, but my mindset, my attitude to this program is to people to try to understand what the issues are. I'm more interested in the issue than just giving information, because I'm not an expert on this thing. But I use these templates to illustrate the issues I'm interested in, which I believe are very accurate in terms of assessment. People need to understand what the problem is before solving. Because if you want to solve problems, you need to know the causes before you find solutions to the problem. You have to identify what the problem is. And once you have identified, you understand what the problem is, then you begin to design a plan. What you're going to do about it. You see, you have to figure out what you're going to do, and then do it. And then figure out if what you're doing is working. If not, then you do a review. You take a step back You have to run your life. You have to manage your life. You have to manage your finances. It doesn't matter which part of the world you are. You have to change the way you think about development. You see, your education is your responsibility. Your health is your responsibility. The government, if the government gives you anything, take it. But your mindset should change for your own good, for your own survival. It is your welfare that will change the way you think from a dependency mindset to a self-reliant mindset. Wake up every morning, seek help from the government if you are in the developed world. But if you are in the developing world, seek help from your family, seek help from your community, seek help from anybody except the government, because the government in Africa do not help anyone. They may help you indirectly through providing national security, but by default, national security protects those in power. People on the street are on their own. So as a community, you should also begin to think creatively in Africa, providing your own protection. If you have land, learn how to protect your land from thieves, because land is becoming premium everywhere in the world. In Africa, a lot of people still own land, and this is a major issue in Africa now. Because people are becoming aware of the value of land. A lot of people are actually stealing land, and they are taking land by force. They are taking land by force, stealing land, selling land which doesn't belong to them, because the law and the legal system and the security system cannot function. The court, because of corruption, civil infrastructure is failing in Africa. Because a lot of African leaders are actually relying on the military to run the continent, and this is something called military dictatorship. And I've already argued everywhere, in most places, that democracy is a work in progress. It's an aspiration, because it doesn't exist even in the West because of the civil bureaucracy. Civil bureaucracy is not a public or private issue, because even if in the private sector, if bureaucracy is there, it's something called to do with compliance, GDPR, for example. The things like privacy, confidentiality, compliance, accountability. All these things means you have to really be professional. Professionalism means sometimes people who need help don't get it. If you work for a private company, you're instructed to focus on building the organization. Customer service means understanding policy and practices, procedures and things like that. You have to comply. First of all, you have to take accountability, take responsibility for your work, and empower your customers, and learn how to communicate with them. And these are things now you need to do professionally. And you have to learn things like empathy. You need to understand what sympathy, how it differs with empathy, so that you take a step back. You don't go too passionate. I mean, if you go to a shop and you ask the shop assistant to give their phone number, because they are very friendly. They are trained to be very friendly. Professionally, they are trained to talk to you, to make you feel good, to make you feel comfortable. This is customer service. And it can be confusing sometimes. If somebody is suddenly so friendly to you, sometimes you feel maybe you can confide in them, you can talk to them about your children, your marriage. You try to chat with them, but they are dealing with you professionally. You're trying, they draw the line. You shouldn't be too personal, too familiar with the professional working with you. And these are actually things which are real. They are civil bureaucracy. They are part of. They stifle freedom. You can speak freely to a stranger. They are nice, they are trained, they are professional, but they are still strangers. You're not going to give them your address, your home address. You're not going to tell them your bank details, and date of birth, unless they need it. So, this if you look at this, this undermines democracy. Democracy is about freedom. It's about freedom. So, as long as we still have to deal with compliance, the law, the law is still, if we still operate the rule of law as a precept, as a form of practice, then democracy is not yet there. But so therefore we have something called civil dictatorship in a democracy, and we have military dictatorship in places where there is no democracy. That's my analysis. I think I'm very accurate about it. And if you comment below what you think about democracy, if you think it is there, then how come you are suffering the cost of living? Because if there is democracy, it should be free from poverty. It should be free from the cost of living. There should not be in a food bank, or it should be going to the DWP for the job center, or whatever you call it, to get benefit. That means you're poor. That is not democracy. Democracy doesn't exist in that sense, because and democracy cannot be measured by the amount of money you have or you don't have. But more important, democracy should express itself in how you value human life. If you value human life and you are, as a society, you don't call each other strangers. You are friends, your families, and you don't live in poverty, then I can say you're free. And freedom actually gives birth to democracy in practice, in reality. So thank you for watching this. Next time we'll meet, we're going to continue discussing the financial problem which occurs in America. I have already discussed this in the other video. So this video is actually a continuation of the other videos. They are in parts. So this is going to be part number 12, which you should watch in conjunction with the other videos, because all a lot of information are in the other videos about what happened in America. And what happened in America was the government refused to give housing to homeless people in America. Instead, he devised a system which probably wasn't tested, wasn't actually the correct system. He tried to use the financial system of lending in America, the private system of lending to buy houses. They allowed people who were not qualified to borrow money, because to borrow money in the market, you have to have a credit worthiness. And if you are not credit worthy, then you shouldn't be allowed, because it means you are going to default. Defaulting means you're not going to pay back. And therefore, because modern economy is now based on credit system, and it is shadowy, it's fake. It's a fake process of doing business, because somebody can be a multi-billionaire, but there are billionaires in debt, in credit. That means the wealth is sometimes not real. And that's the fundamental featuring a major problem within modern capitalism, the market system. That's what created the problem in America, because the government tried to provide public housing to homeless people who are poor, less educated, people who should not be given credit. They should rely on help, direct help from the government using public facilities to provide public service. But because of ideology and political rhetoric, and lots and lots of cultural ignorance, failing to believe that the government has a function to help people who cannot help themselves, who are incidentally the majority of people in the world, because capitalism concentrates wealth among the few, maybe 5 or 10% of the population, as an estimate. And that is the characteristic of the thing, and that's why it is of necessity. If it is supposed to be social and economic justice, then the public sector should be expanded, and the private sector should be restricted, should be reduced, and should focus on the wealthy. And the government should avoid a situation where there is a crisis affecting the economy, because the private sector is not regulated by the government. The responsibility of the government is to mitigate this crisis. What happened in America was the crisis went out of control, and the American government put a lot of public money to bail out businesses, big businesses, to avoid a catastrophe. The total meltdown of the global economy and the total collapse of the global. Because you see, our life and livelihood, our livelihood actually supports our life, is directly, fundamentally linked to how the economy operates. Whether we live or die depends on whether the economy operates or not. And if we continue like this, economic chaos alone is going to be worse than the cost of living crisis. That's what I'm talking about. That's why I'm trying to link the two together so that you form a fairly clearer picture of things. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. It doesn't matter whether it's only one person commenting, or 2 people, or 3 or 4 or 5. You're welcome. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed, and share with family and friends.